Arnold could bench 525 pounds. That was his peak. That's one thing to learn from his book, Be Useful, 7 Tools for Life. Here he writes, for decades, 500 was a mythical number for the bench press. By the end of the decade, Bruno Sammartino would smash Hepburn's record with a lift of 565 pounds. I've benched 525 pounds myself. The unassisted record, which has been broken and rebroken numerous times since, is now well over 750 pounds. Further in the book, he says, as a weightlifter, I failed on 10 different final lifts to bench press 500 pounds, back when that figure was almost unheard of. Once I finally did it, benching 500 pounds got easier and set me on a course to eventually put up 525 pounds. All right, I'm going to just go through each of the sections in this book. There's, like the title says, 7 tools for life. I will talk about a few quotes from each section. Overall, really enjoyed the book. I also think you should check out Education of a Bodybuilder. That's probably still my favorite book about Arnold Schwarzenegger. Here we go. Number 1, have a clear vision. Jack LaLanne offered him $200,000 a year to be a fitness ambassador for his 200 health clubs. Arnold said no. Here he writes, that was a lot of money in 1974. It's still a lot of money. Back then, the best bodybuilders in the world made $50,000 a year at most. It was a fantastic offer, and I turned it down without a second thought. Being a national spokesman for a health club franchise was not part of my vision. That's the end of the quote. Throughout the book, you see the importance of having a strong vision for Arnold. That was how he was able to succeed, really conquer different disciplines. In bodybuilding, he had a vision of standing on the podium. In movies, he had a vision not only of being the leading man, but he could visualize the poster for a big hit and that his name would have top billing at the top of the poster. In government, he could visualize himself giving a motivating speech. Picturing something like a Mr. Universe win, a Mr. Olympia win, standing on the podium is great. But another thing to visualize, I learned this from Ali Abdaal, it's visualizing a great normal Tuesday in the future. You want to visualize the day-to-day. What does that really look like if, say, you want to switch careers or 5 years from now, work for yourself or something like that? That's nice as a succinct goal, but what does that actually look like? What activities would you want to do in a normal day-to-day? Not the vacations, travel, or anything like that. That's great having that leisure trip that you have a few times a year, but what does a normal day look like? How are you going to spend it? Who are you spending it with? What kind of work are you going to do? If you think you're not going to be working, what are you going to replace the time with? It's really useful to try to picture that, and also to realize that there are probably some activities for that ideal future weekday that you can do right now. Chapter 2, never think small. He says that there's one person who he says is even crazier about thinking big. That's James Cameron, who of course directed Terminator 2. They've been close ever since. And he points out that James Cameron in the 80s, 90s with Titanic, and then with Avatar in the 2000s, he's always thought big. He doesn't really try to do small movies. And this leads to also having the biggest box office movies in history. This goes kind of hand in hand with having the clear vision. You want to have a clear vision of something very big. Coming to America and being the best bodybuilder in the world, that's a pretty big vision. And that was something that Arnold had. That drove him from when he was a teenager all the way to when he was on the podium, and then picturing repeating on the podium, then having that vision of being the biggest movie star in the world. That's a big, big goal. He doesn't really think small. Arnold writes about this phrase, Wenskan Denskan. I'm probably saying that wrong, but he says, roughly translated, it means if you're going to do something, do it. Go all out. What this reminded me of is this podcast called My First Million. One of the hosts, Sean Prury, talks about how, I think it was his dad, was talking to him just about like what he should do with his life. They're discussing like, if he's going to be an entrepreneur, what should he go for? What should he work on? And his dad said, well, you're going to be working hard. You're probably going to burn out working on whatever it is that you're working on. So you're going to burn out if you work on the smaller thing. You're going to burn out if you work on the big thing. So why not go for the big thing? Never think small. Tool number 3 is work your butt off. He talks about people who climb Mount Everest. The value of doing that is in the climb itself. He gives the hypothetical of what if Sir Edmund Hillary was dropped off by helicopter to the top of Mount Everest instead of having to climb for weeks. Of course, it's not as satisfying. It's in doing that hard work to get there that the growth happens, and also that all the value is in. The most obvious direct hard work that Arnold did was in bodybuilding. It's so obvious that that takes a lot of hard work because it's literally workouts, but he also talks about specific work for different movies. With Twins, he had to learn dance and improv. With Terminator, he was practicing gun stunts with his eyes closed. With Terminator 2, he was practicing that shotgun flip, the one that he does on the motorcycle. He was doing that until his hands bled. When he was in government, he embodied this idea that for a speech, practicing 10 times will lead to something decent, but if he practices the speech 20 times, he'll be able to knock it out of the park. Here's a few quotes. He says, "Work works. That's the bottom line. No matter what you do, no matter who you are, my entire life has been shaped by that single idea." Further, he writes, "I trained 2.5 hours in the morning and 2.5 hours in the evening." And further, he says, "Reps build strength, but pain builds size. That's why I wanted the pain." And all of this reminded me, especially the Mount Everest part, of Super Mario 3 with the warp whistle. You could get a warp whistle, you can get a second warp whistle. If you use them both, then you can teleport to World 8. You skip the entire game, basically, and you only play the last world, and then you can beat the game. It's sort of satisfying because you can beat it, but it doesn't feel like you earned it. You also just miss out on a lot of fun. There are some of the best level designs in some of the previous levels that you're just completely skipping over. So it kind of is missing the point of games being fun. You turn it into just this checkbox achievement, and doing the work is where the value is and where some of the joy can be as well. Tool number 4, sell, sell, sell. Arnold Schwarzenegger is doing a bunch of interviews to promote the book, and he always brings up the importance of this chapter. It's one of the chapters he says that people are somewhat like taken aback by, that if you want to improve yourself, why do you have to sell yourself if you're just trying for self-improvement? But he talks about how important having that salesman mindset and at least knowing how to use it as a tool has helped in his career and can help other people. Yes, he was the best bodybuilder, but bodybuilding did have this image where people thought it was a bit of a freak show. He had to sell bodybuilding to the public. In Hollywood, his first movie was Conan, but he had to help sell himself as a leading man. Otherwise, he was only getting offered roles like being a soldier or a security guard. Even with some of the early success, he was still an action hero. He had to continue to sell himself. That's how he was able to sell himself as a comedy lead in Twins alongside Danny DeVito. That actually ended up being the movie that made him the most money, is this comedy. It was more about how the deal was structured, which he had to also sell. Switching from acting to being in government, he had to sell himself as someone to take serious, even with his lack of experience. Some quotes: "No matter the size of your dream, you have to know how to sell it and who to sell it to." And then always aligning back to vision. It is this idea that if you believe the vision yourself, it's going to be easier to sell others on that vision. So he writes, it's not, "I will be a leading man." It's, "I can picture myself as a leading man." That's the end of the quote. But being able to picture things, visualize them vividly is important for selling. Logan Paul is fighting this weekend, as long as no one pulls out of the fight. And of course, Logan and his brother Jake Paul, they've been able to make a lot of money with fights by boxing without being world-class boxers. The further we get away from it, it is crazy that Logan Paul boxed Floyd Mayweather. They were able to do this because they were able to sell. They focused more on selling, that they already had these world-class skills as entertainers to sell themselves, to sell entertainment. They understood that world, and it's been lucrative. It does seem like Jake wants to be an actual boxer, and this has opened the door for him at least to have a chance at fighting real boxers and forging a path to become a professional there. Number 5, shift gears. In this chapter, Arnold writes about failure and how to adjust when failing. He gives this analogy of powerlifting meets where for each lift, you get 3 lifts. So the first one is one that you know you can do. The second is going to be the one that you're pretty sure you can do. And if you hit it, then you put pressure on your opponents. It's kind of the lift that you're going to try to win with. The third lift is where you're trying to set a PR. If you hit that one, then you're putting a lot of pressure on your opponents. He says that third lift is a microcosm for chasing your dreams out in the real world. To chase that dream, you do have to stretch to do something that you haven't done before. He also has a good point here that to continue to grow, do not avoid failure. On the other hand, don't waste too much energy trying to seek it out. Just chase your vision. The failure is inevitable, so you don't want to seek out extra failure. It's going to come. You need to learn to shift gears to deal with it. Some quotes here, he writes, "You work to make a dream come true. You don't whine it into existence." Then he talks about the importance of joy in his life. He writes, "All my friends will tell you that one of the most distinctive things about me is my ability to find joy in everything I do. Being positive has made my life better. It's that simple." That's the end of the quote. And that's that idea that shifting gears, finding joy, to be able to shift into that gear where you're enjoying what you're doing. Even if it's not something you absolutely love, if you can find joy in small parts of that, then that will make the whole a little bit easier. And then another quote here, he says, "The beauty of weightlifting is that failure is baked into the practice. The whole goal in weightlifting is to work your muscles to failure, which we sometimes forget." That's the end of the quote. And I think that's just really good for demonstrating the value of weightlifting or fitness and setting goals there, that it's good to have that in life because you can create very clear goals and then see if you're hitting, see if you're stretching yourself. In other parts of your life, sometimes it's not as clear. If you're trying to learn something, sometimes it's not exactly like clear how to set the goals there. But for weightlifting, you set a number, you set some reps, you try to lift that, and it's pretty clear if you did or you didn't. The next tool, number 6, is titled "Shut Your Mouth, Open Your Mind." This is about learning and curiosity. Arnold is a very curious person. He always has been. Something from one of his earlier biographies, The Education of a Bodybuilder. He talks about coming to America for the first time for his first bodybuilding meet and then really understanding the value of learning the language. Yes, it meant that he would be able to communicate in America, but also was the language that everyone was speaking in the locker room before the meet. So he knew he had to learn that so that he could talk to people and then learn the different techniques there. In government, he had to learn as well. He played up the value of having him come in as an outsider who would do things differently from politicians before him. That said, when he was elected as governor, it did mean that he had to learn how to do a lot of things that others with more experience might have taken for granted. So he was kind of learning on the fly. And to do that, he had to talk to a lot of people, shut his mouth, open his mind, learn. He talks about using your mind as a muscle or else it will atrophy. Similarly, in the gym, you have to use muscle or you lose it. In Hollywood, you have to use fame because your star will dim if you don't continue to do movies. And then in government, you have to use money in appropriate ways to achieve things. He talks about his childhood and having a father figure of the neighborhood in a way. It's this person named Freddie Gerstle, his childhood friend Carl's father. He would organize a group of boys for athletic training and outdoor physical activities. Arnold writes, "Freddie made us see that the world was the ultimate classroom and that we needed to be like a sponge, soaking up as much of it as we could. He made us understand that the way to become the kind of sponge that absorbs only the most useful knowledge was to always be curious." That's the end of the quote. Another example of shutting his mouth and opening his mind successfully was when he first met with James Cameron for Terminator. Arnold was talking about what he thinks the Terminator should be. Arnold was actually auditioning for Kyle Reese, the hero, the good guy in the movie. As he was talking, the gears were turning in James Cameron's head, and Arnold shut his mouth and listened, and James Cameron shared his idea that Arnold should instead play the Terminator, the bad guy. Arnold was open-minded about it, even though his agents didn't like the idea. James Cameron said that the Terminator is not a bad guy. The Terminator is neutral. The bad guys are the ones that sent him back in time to murder everyone, but the Terminator is just a robot. This reminded me of Hulk Hogan in the WCW, where he had been yellow and red Hulkamania for a decade plus, and then he switched it up, embraced becoming a heel, and then had a big or bigger run with the NWO. All right. Number 7, break your mirrors. He writes, You can call me Schnitzel. You can call me Termy. You can call me Arnie. You can call me Schwartzy. But don't ever call me a self-made man. That's the end of the quote. This chapter is about everyone that's helped him and how we can learn to help others. That's the idea. Break the mirror. Stop only trying to improve yourself. That's important, but it's also important to seek out others who need help and to try to help them. He writes, who I am, where I am, why I am here, what I have had the opportunity to do. This is all because of the impact of hundreds of special people in my life. Another quote is, life isn't zero sum. We can all grow together, get richer together, get stronger together. Everyone can win in their own time, in their own way. That's the end of the quote. And right now, he's kind of a content creator. He has his videos. He helps thousands of people through his newsletter. In the 90s, he was kind of a fitness czar and was able to help a lot of people around the country, thousands of people also around the country. But he writes, I get an equal amount of joy from randomly spending 10 minutes with some old geezer in the gym to show him proper form for a pull down. That's the end of the quote. You can find ways to help people at scale by sharing your knowledge online. At the same time, you can look to help someone in real life today and just have that mindset of trying to help other people. This idea of not being a self-made man reminded me of Elon Musk. I just finished his biography last week. I've been making some Elon videos. The thing that I'm learning from the comments, people hate Elon. There's people that love him as well. And on both sides, I think there are misconceptions. So something that I see repeatedly in comments is that Elon just spent daddy's money to buy different companies and then claim their success as his own. That's not really true. If I'm to believe the book, that he didn't get that much money from his dad. I think the biggest sum was, $20,000 when he was starting Zip2, which is substantial to keep him afloat so that he could actually do the startup. But the kind of snowball was being able to do Zip2 and then merge Zip2 with PayPal and then take things away from there. And then as far as help from other people, he had plenty of help along the way as well, similar to Arnold, that Arnold credits a lot of people. Elon credits especially the other people at PayPal who he's stayed friends with. He knows the value of having that kind of connection. And then just the value of hiring other people. He emphasizes that all the time, that it's important to hire the best people. If people single-handedly credit Elon with rocket design, people always point out, well, he's not the one that designed it by himself. And even then, a lot of the design came from NASA. I think he would acknowledge that is the sense that I get. But with any of these very famous, very successful people, there are so many people that were involved along the way to give them the path and to succeed and to pick them back up when they've failed. All of them have pretty huge failures as well along the way. And I think a contrast here between the two of them is that Elon cares about humanity. In his vision, he talks about humanity becoming a multiplanetary species. But sometimes it seems like he doesn't care about individual humans. He's very mean because he knows the second order, third order effects. If he's not mean and he doesn't fire this person, then the team fails. That affects way more people. He cares about humanity more than any individual human. But Arnold really, really values and tries to spread the message of individuals helping themselves through things like fitness and self-development. He knows the value that comes when someone is able to take ownership of themselves, to pick themselves up through different means. That message scales well so that everyone is first able to help themselves and then they can seek out others to help. Good book, useful tools. I'm going to go try to lift 525 pounds. Thanks for listening.